All right, Gary. So last time we talked about a lot of your childhood. We kind of ended with you talking about going to Hawaii, your time in Winona. I think it makes a lot of sense to discuss, you know, you're raised on a dairy farm. June here is livestock month. We're talking about livestock management in the magazine. And we try to follow that a little bit with the other content that we talk about. But can you talk us through the process and how, I guess you fell into dairy nutrition, and you know what strategies and information did you receive throughout college or in your practices that, you know, changed the way that you kind of look at how dairy nutrition is, and then how you are different from other normal dairy nutritionists?
Yeah, I think the thing is that, of course, I spent 9 years at that university. Well, some of it was into education, but it wasn't all on dairy nutrition. But I was on a track to probably become a professor at this thing. And then I realized that my knowledge base, and when I started doing research, I was doing research on methionine in Hawaii. And then we had some troubles with effective fiber. And I think I mentioned that's how we got to be organic, because I found this pineapple hay in Hawaii. I fed the cows, and they started to abort because it was laced with insecticides. And then, but I said, people are eating pineapple, and they said, yeah, but not that much. Well, now what bite of every human's diet today has not got an insecticide, fungicide, or pesticide on it? So anyway, then that got me out of the university scene, and I got a job.
What was happening to the cattle with the pineapple hay?
The pineapple hay was a good fiber source to get chew or cud, because we were getting pelleted feed from California, so you can't violate the principles of a cow. She has to be able to buffer this out. She'll have acidosis. She'll get very acidic because she can't chew or cud because she makes the bicarbonate. So I found in Hawaii, what's there to feed her for a fiber source? Pineapple. Mm-hmm. And that was, at that time, the island's full of pineapple. So we started feeding pineapple hay and just making this hay. After they harvested the pineapple, we ground up the rest of the plant and fed them this in their ration for hay. And that way back in 1971, 60s, late 60s, early 70s, Meadow Gold Dairy was 1,500 cows back then. And the cows started to abort when we started feeding them the pineapple. And then it took them a long time to figure it out. It was the insecticides on the hay that caused the abortions. They dumped the milk for 6 months because chemicals accumulate in fats. So these cows, they couldn't get the insecticide low enough in milk. They could sell the milk. And that's when I dropped out of school. I said, oh my gosh, I had no idea what I was up to. And then I had to come back. And
do you think that there's any relation? Because you just made a comment like how many bites of food do we take that isn't laced with insecticides in some way? Do you think there's a relation because miscarriage numbers are higher in humans now than they were?
Yeah. I think people have more trouble with fertility than they used to too.
Yeah, do you think those
they might
things are
have delayed having their children, which might affect it. But yeah, absolutely. There's a correlation between the chemistries and what happens that forming that fetus and health of the woman and all these other things that go with it. But so when I came back, when I was in Hawaii, I had assistantships. I was teaching in the lab, and we had students from Indonesia and other countries in Hawaii at that time. So then I kind of liked teaching, so I went back and got my education credits, and I took that job teaching in Winona at the Tech College, teaching farm operation and management. Well, I had to teach soils, agronomy, farm finance, and dairy nutrition. So I got introduced to soils. I had to teach the soils and some of that. So dairy nutrition, I understood it from the teaching side, or from the university side, about balancing rations. There's computers and numbers, and every farm just follows those today. You can't violate within the numbers. You got to have a certain amount of calcium, a certain amount of phosphorus, and that's real today. The difficulty is that they say that we know how to balance the rations, and so, but what it is, if you got a high quality, high digestible forage, 95% of those minerals the cows can use. If you got a crummy forage and it's more mature and rank and it's not very digestible, the digestibility is down on the forage, so you might only get 50% of them. The bag of minerals that you buy to feed your cattle is at best 50% usable. So I said, why are we balancing the rations with the same numbers for everybody? If you grow super quality forages and you got all these minerals in that forage, I should not have to supplement your cows near as much. And so that's when my teacher at the tech school. Then I got introduced. I had to teach soils, and I brought outside speakers in, and one of those was a Brookside person, and they were talking about mineral balance, and it made perfect sense to me. But then every student had to do a project on a farm, and so in the summertime, because it was a 2-year post-high program, so one of the students put on some calcium and some sulfur and some trace minerals, and the feed test changed. And I think I also mentioned, I think we mentioned one time before, is in 1976, there was a major, major drought. and the farmers were buying hay from Nebraska. And the farmers would say to me, this feeds different. Well, that's really a scientific term. It feeds different. What does that mean? Well, the cows really like it. They'll eat it better. If you get way high potassium, I was just on a farm over in northeast Wisconsin, 5,000 cows, and the cows, I asked him why he started our fertilizer program. He said, well, the cows won't eat the hay anymore. The leaves are laying in the manger. They won't eat the leaves. They're bitter. Because too much potassium, not enough calcium. All we did is drop this potassium, put on more calcium, and put on our BioCal and change this feed. The next thing you know, the cows, and he said, not only that, he said they seemed our cows are getting healthier. Well, see, the mineral imbalance was causing a lot of excesses and deficiencies. You got to deal with those things. So once I saw feed tests change, the company I started, Midwestern BioAg, deserves credit for taking dairy nutrition to the soil. Now, there's still a small number of people only doing it, but that's gaining ground. It's gaining ground. Why wouldn't this have an impact? What would ideal forage for a dairy cow look like? I could increase the mineral content, I could increase digestibility, I could get much better quality forages. And so back in those days, when I left teaching and got into consulting, because I really got into this thing about soils, so I'm self-taught in soils, because cows and soils are very similar. They're biological systems and they take mineral balance and all that kind of stuff. I got started with the A.O. Smith harvester. Harvester people kind of put up these new blue silos, and everybody, all the cow people have a bad taste in their mouth about it. I'm telling you, when those suckers work, guys, they changed how people grew hay. When I was a kid, what did we do? We made our hay, it was dry hay, it had to be made by the 4th of July. Harvester, if you're going to spend $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 for a structure, you cut it earlier. And in the beginning, and then, of course, for their silo, you had to let it get a little bit drier, but you changed how you made it out. Some of the silos leaked and there were problems, and we'll get into that, but the guys that followed that method, now they grew quality forages. And some of my first customers, the guy was making dry hay and feeding cob corn and putting DiCal and trace mineral salt, and had a lick tank out there feeding his cows urea. Put up 3 new harvesters, 2 haylage units and a shell corn unit. And he put up high moisture shell corn, and he put up haylage in his harvesters, and that winter he called the harvester deal and said, my cows are sick, your silos are killing my cows. Wow, he never changed. The lick tank is still in the yard. He's still feeding as much high moisture shell corn as he fed cob corn, and he didn't realize that that silo full of haylage out here, it needed some other things. It was a lot more soluble nutrients in it. So I got in there and I fixed their ration, so I got to understand how it's the solubility port and how to get nutrients broke down. And the other thing is that when I started my company, I'm a dairy nutritionist, and I took dairy nutrition to the soils, and I see if you got cattle, you're going to get paid twice for what you do. Once for getting better crops, and the other thing, the cattle are going to do better. So otherwise, if you're just selling your hay or selling your corn, you only get paid once.
Yeah.
To grow that crop. So that's how that whole business got started. So then it was still Midwest. The hardest part we ever had to do, and then I lost the battle eventually when I started Midwestern BioAg. I see nowadays there's way too many lawyers, I think. I don't know. But see, if I take a ration to you and say, all right, after 2 or 3 years putting on high quality fertilizers on your pasture, you don't need to feed as much mineral to your cows. You can cut it down by 25%, you can cut it in half. If I write that on a piece of paper and you have troubles with your cows, you will now probably sue me.
Yeah.
And so that's a real problem. So there's still consultant but Bob Schmittner was our customer consultant for Arcadia. He's still out here doing something. He's elderly, but he still told that to farmers all the time. But we couldn't write it down. We'd have to write down the ration of what the computer said, but then we'd say, look, but you can cheat. It's your farm. You don't have to buy all those minerals.
So that's interesting. Would you say the conventional wisdom is that they have this base set of a ration?
Yeah.
And you're saying that essentially that the feed needs to be tested first before you develop the ration to understand what they are getting out of the
Where
feed.
they're getting from. And nowadays, what is the ration on dairy farms or any farm? These guys learned how to make, and I started with harvester, learned how to make better quality for it. There already guys got cut a lot of their hay made already. Around us, there's a big dairy farm, they cut that really succulent, high digestible, but then 80% of the diet's corn silage. So corn silage is a tropical grass, which varies, doesn't take up minerals, and it varies, it's always the same, it varies very little. If you get it cut, when you got a bigger window to get it harvested, you only have to make 1 cutting a year, or hey, you got to make 3 or 4, and they're out there mudding it off today, and it gets rained on. So ideally, I would rather feed a higher percent haylage and less corn silage, but I understand, then they buy, what drove these big farms to get all these cows and all this milk is that they feed a lot of corn silage, but they got ethanol plants. They got to get rid of those byproduct protein sources, and they go to all those conventional dairy farms. That's what changed the agriculture. But the cows don't last long. It's a hot ration. They don't grow their own feed anymore. They don't. I worked with farms that wanted to, it was like our farm here. We're organic and we pretty well cover crops and corn, and we're really low input. I came out of that world, but dairy farms nowadays, corn silage is what it is, and that makes it life easier for them, and then they buy a lot of stuff, and they got a computer ration. Everybody does the same. I don't work with the big farms on dairy nutrition because it's just a computer ration, and how they do things, you don't need my help.
Yeah.
I'm after longevity, and I'm after keeping cows healthy, and I'm after all kinds of other things. I told the dairy farm how I got started. I said, you got to give me your dry cows during that rest period. I got to build up her nutrition. And I said, you got to be, and see, in the old days, milk cows and dry cows were all together, because we all made dry cow feed because we made hay the 4th of July. Well, now they make really super hot feeds for the milk cows, but you can't feed that to a dry cow when she's not in a rest period. So you got to grow special feeds and high potassium, all kinds of things get those cows in trouble. So I wanted the farmer's forages and I wanted his dry cows, and that's still true today. Those two you got to really pay attention to if you want to make it go, and not buy your milk product. I could just buy their milk product like they buy their corn.
Yeah. So you developed these ideas. What was it like installing these methods? Because you then started a dairy farm here.
Yes, and then it's really interesting is that how did we get farmers to listen? See, when I started, it was
you had
so...
to prove it.
I had to prove it.
Yeah.
And then it's just like on your land and your soil test, whatever, you got to be able to prove it. So then in the beginning, I made the farmers go to a 3-day class before I let them buy fertilizer. Now that's really radical, by the way. I didn't have any money, and I had to get enough money generated to pay for the rent of the building I had the meeting in. And so they got 3 days. One day was on soils, the next day was on feeding cows, and that was on these biological principles. I'll put that all together. And some of these people are still customers today, by the way, and it was kind of interesting. So I said, if they fail, they took me with them. But how I got onto a lot of farms is that usually farmers will change. Why do farmers change? Well, a lot of them change because they got problems. Sick cows. Might have been stray voltage. Bad milk machines. We fixed everything. We came up with a delta detector that measures stray voltage on farms.
What's straight voltage?
Uncontrolled current, because our power company, everybody's now, a lot of lawsuits took place. In the old days, that the wiring was cobbled together, the ground systems were poor, and so we used the earth as a ground. Oh, and there'd be an uncontrolled current, you'd have voltage. So I built a delta detector we had made that we put in the milk house, and so the voltage spurts would come along, it'd go brrr, and about the 3rd day after I put it in, the farmers would unplug it. He was driving us nuts, and then the energy companies got mad at us, and they made us shut us down. They tried to sue us for the fact that they didn't want anybody to know. Well, then they lost tons and tons of lawsuits. So now that a lot of people got milk machines, I actually went after, in the old days, a major milk machine company there. I said, your regulator that controls vacuum in the cow is not functioning. And so we brought on a different regulator in a major milk machine company. And of course, they didn't like that at all. Now they make a good regulator. It changed how they make regulators, because vacuum fluctuations and milk lines that weren't level, because we all milked in stanchion barns, we had fluctuations at the teat end on vacuum, and so then the guy would have, so I had to fix what caused this problem, and then I could get feeds and nutrition, and then that's how I got a lot of customers.
So it's a logistical issue. It wasn't anything to do with the feed.
So yeah, if I had gone in there and got a better quality feed, the cow would have had the ability to make more milk, but his stray voltage and his milk machines wouldn't allow her to anyway. She'd just got sicker.
Then she'd get backed up, yeah.
Yeah, so this is where we had to fix the problems. That's how I got onto a lot of farms. And then I worked with farms there was always farms skeptical. Some guys were skeptical because maybe their wife got cancer or their cousin got cancer. And they said, oh, they didn't trust the chemicals. Or these are a lot of small family dairy farms that, they were looking at trying to do better onto their farm, and that's how the business started.
Yeah. What are the basic, I guess, what would be your basic principles for dairy farming then?
See, my basic principle, and that's why the organic dairy farm is still real for today. It's just like right now, even on crop production, organic, they're all chasing around trying to buy chicken manure. You can grow your own nitrogen. You don't need to keep doing that. But see, that's because they don't fix their soils, and they don't, they're casing the crop that makes the most money, and I can understand they might have to do that. And then they stretch the rules of organic. But I don't really need to do that. So the organic guys out here, and we still work with a lot of, I guess I'd have to honestly say a lot more Mennonite and Amish farmers are more in tune to what we do. just in philosophy and their mentality, how they farm.
Yeah.
So there's some larger ones that certainly buy into the super quality forages things. I would rather not buy my production. I wouldn't want to be on a farm where my turnover is really heavy and I got a lot of sick cows and I got to use drugs all the time. So the farmers that are attracted to what we do want to have healthy cattle and high quality milk.
Well, let's go through a day in the life of a dairy cow in an ideal setting for what you would recommend. Where are they, because most people are, well, not a lot of people are obviously indoors or they're in freestyle barns. Mm-hmm. Where would you start the day, first milking, and walk through the process of what the ideal dairy cow is going through on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think that last summer I was over in Poland. It was really, really interesting. They took 700 cow dairy farms and made them 400 cow dairy farms. See, what we've been taught in the dairy world, freestall buildings are in there, but they overcrowd them. And these guys had robotic milkers, and everybody overcrowds them. They went the other direction. 7 major principles of cow comfort. Not crowd them. It was really fun to watch the robotic milkers because there'd be 2 or 3 cows in line and then another one would get up and walk over. They never wanted over 3 cows in line. You go to a lot of the farms, they're lined up, they can't get milked, they're trying to get through that robotic milker and the stress, and there's too many cows, and they come back. Cows are creatures of habit. They want to go back in that same stall they were in. Well, now somebody else is in it, and there's no stall nearby they can lay in, and so in Poland they took all of those things. The only thing they did, they were feeding too hot a ration, in my opinion. They had some foot problems, but oh my gosh, cow comfort. What is a cow like? They want space, and they want to have fresh air, and they like being out and they need to be out in fresh air. They need to be grazing. So all the I can lock them in a box and get them to probably give more milk, but I'm going to have a much more stressed cow. What's the quality of the milk when I do that? Is another question. So I think my ideal world for the cow is, I got a milker, whether I use a robot or a milk machine out here, but I'm not one to stanchion barns. There's a lot of pressure being put on that. Guys aren't going to put cows in stanchion barns much longer and get away with it, because years ago they had a while where they cut all the tails off of cows because they didn't want them to swat you in the face while you're milking them. Well, can't do that. That's inhumane in a way. I think Joe Salatin was always really good at that. I see you said you're going to have him at your conference this year. Joe Salatin always said, you got to let a chicken be a chicken and a cow be a cow and a pig be a pig. Mm-hmm. So what's a cow being a cow? She wants to eat forages. She's normally going to have high forage diet. She wants to be outside. She needs some fresh green grass. She needs fresh air. She can't be crowded. You got to have more space for them. And there's always a pecking order within that barn, within those cows.
Yeah. And you can tell when you watch them graze, and if they ever get access to, an old area with their manure and pee, they won't eat it unless you make them. Yeah. So when you see those pastures, those places that are right down to the dirt, and that they're walking over feces and pee, they hate it, but they're still eating it.
And then beef cattle and dairy are different. That's why I said cows don't like to eat around the manure piles.
Yeah.
So for some reason, is a cow smart enough to realize that centuries ago that's where the parasites came from?
Yeah.
Number one. The other thing is that what's that plant near that manure pile? What's it high in? Nitrogen and potash. Oh, so this potassium makes plants bitter, and free nitrogen, incomplete proteins, they don't like it. That's why you got to have sulfur, and you got to have things out here to get them to graze more uniformly. And of course, that's why rotational grazing, a lot of them in it, but then giving it a rest, let that break down. A lot of guys might even drag some of their pasture on these dairy farms, but they don't want to eat around a manure pile, but because you got nitrogen and potassium. But I can put my calcium and things out to offset that, so they'll do better at that.
So how does a dairy farmer make sure that they do have fresh grass, at least a reasonable access to fresh grass? Would you send them out to a pasture between the morning milking, bring them in for the evening milking, and then keep them in the freestyle barn at night, or would you kick them out at night?
It depends on the management. I think some farmers would prefer to do. They just let them out. See, that's why we actually started milking at 3 o'clock in the morning when we had dairy farms, because it gets hot during the day in the summertime. Yeah. So we get done milking at 6 or 7, turn them out to pasture. But normally that pasture is not as high in sugars then, because there's dew in it and it grew all night. So the afternoon pasture is going to be higher in sugar. So we'd milk at 3 in the afternoon. At 4 o'clock, that was the best grazing, was in the evening. The cows like the graze bed is higher in sugar the plant would be, because it's been photosynthesizing all day long. So I would like my cows to get out, and I realized that we had to go get cows in the middle of the night. They didn't all come back to the barn and all that. We had to go get them, and that's just a different world out here. So that's why some people might say, I want them in the barn when I come up in the morning to milk, but they miss out on a really good grazing. And I think how much of the diet needs to be a fresh green grass, and because there's enzymes and hormones and vitamins and things you wouldn't get out of stored feed out of that.
Yeah.
Depends on what you want. You can all supplement some of that stuff, and of course you just have troubles with cows if you don't take care of that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm one of those guys that would like to, whether it be only a certain percent. Now, on a grazing farm, we do have a problem. We have a problem on dairy herds. See, where are you going to graze your cows? Closer to the buildings. We had 100 acres of creek bottom pasture. We couldn't farm it. It was just permanent pasture. So in the morning we get done milking, we go out there, we rotated and grazed that. So where do you think a lot of the manure ended up? In the pastures.
Yeah.
So the numbers got higher and higher and higher and higher into the pastures. It's easier when they're locked in confinement. I can take the manure and spread it around where I got my hay from. But if I'm only going to graze, the grazing is hard to have a nutrient management plan with a grazing operation.
Yeah, because of the central location of
the milking.
Barn.
Yep.
So let's say you have 200 acres. Would you ever? Yeah, the problem is getting them back to the barn every day.
Yeah,
I was gonna say you rotate, your corn production and keep them off. You could almost rotate, a cornfield, have it be a cover crop field. Could they graze that, on the off year or something? But then it just needs to be logistically close to your.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They will travel a long ways.
They can milk cows. There's still energy really to get out there. And I know some guys say, they can walk 7 miles, but I think in South Africa, 1,000 cows and that's 100% grazing year round. They fed them grain in the parlor when they milked them, but 1,000 cows, but all flat level pastures. It wasn't scattered in hills, scattered all over. 1,000 cows on a unit is about the maximum that you can manage it. And they made them walk quite a ways, and they rotated. And it was all irrigated, and we could make it work. It wasn't my favorite thing.
Yeah.
But those farms also, then they bought the grain and they fed minerals to their cows. So they're bringing stuff onto the farm. It's not just in the pastures, the manure staying out there. They didn't feed. They made some corn salads during the heat of the summer to feed the cows some corn salads. They made a little bit of corn salads. So and then they reseed some pastures. That would be their method of getting some more energy into the cows. And the kikuyu grass during the heat of the summer was low energy.
What would you plant on your off year of corn that you could graze with dairy cattle?
And I think the guys that are going out here now, it's interesting to see what's happening. Corn being a tropical grass, there's a lot of people in grass-fed beef and grass-fed dairy are using male sterile corn. Now
sterile corn, so
no kernels.
And then they eat it. So they let it get mature. Because I've heard of people eating or grazing forage corn before.
Yeah, we used to plant on our bottoms to get a rotation to get reseeded. So every couple of years or every 3-4 years, I'd want to reseed my pastures down and work those up and get my nutrients back into the soil and reseed them. So then we went through sorghum Sudan grass, tropical grass, and corn silage or maize, whatever, and these high digestible maize or male sterile, as a lot of people use. That's still, see what's wrong with a super quality pasture that's really high digestible, it's going to be too high in protein. So I got to dilute it down. Well, corn silage is low in protein. Sorghum Sudan grass is lower in protein. Don't take out the protein. So I got to have some way to. I can't feed that hot ration to the cow, that much protein to the cow, because oh man, they get skinny. They're on the Atkins diet, and it's too digestible. It squirts, and so if I let my pastures get bigger, that's fine. But that works nice for beef cattle, and they waste the corn. But for dairy cows, it's hard to get enough digestibility. Their milk production drops.
And how would you use sorghum? Would you use it as an offset of corn, or that wouldn't make any sense?
Yeah, I'd use it as an offset. In the rotation, I could take in, so if I'm going to put in corn, and I'd use sorghum Sudan grass also to be it's a good weed smother. But see what's wrong with everybody says, sorghum Sudan grass, you put 30 pounds of seed per acre. You want to be really successful, go to some of these grazer people that are really good at this thing. 100 pounds of seed per acre. Get it really thick. Otherwise it gets big, coarse, rank stems. Get it really thick, and then you can graze it a couple of grazings out here, and it's highly digestible. It's a really good feed, sorghum.
I've had good luck with it. It's a base. I think of it as a base in our cover crop blends that we plant, just because it can be grazed 3-4 times a year and it keeps coming back.
Yeah.
Or if you did let it go, it's pretty good stockpile if you end up letting it, get mature.
It's not going to lignify. It's not going to get complex, even if it gets more mature. You can do things like millets and other plants, but a lot of those are annuals, and an annual will get more. A tropical grass doesn't get lignified, or the perennials.
So that's that when you say something gets lignified, is that what makes something good or bad at stockpiling?
Well, I think
forage?
that if you take a brome or orchard grass or some of these grasses that we have in our perennial system, you let them get ranked for stockpiling feed, their digestibility goes really low.
Yeah, but then fescue has good stockpile.
It's yes, it's been bred. It's a fescues are a breed. There's the triticales are rye wheat cross, and fescues are just a bit different plant. Like instead of ryegrass, it's a fescue that's going to have. It's more in sync with your legumes, and it won't lignify, and it won't. And see, rye doesn't work very good. Ryegrass, it might work in New Zealand here because it can't take the winters or the summers.
It's like right now they'd rather eat ryegrass, and they'll eat the fescue last.
They love the ryegrass.
But then in the winter, the fescue is the only thing there, and they'll choose that over anything else.
Yeah, they will. Won't they? After it freezes, after it goes in, just like we got
crazy.
Reed canary grass in some of our pastures. Early spring they'll graze it. Middle of summer they quit grazing. After it freezes, they'll go back and eat it again.
Yeah, so then I'm always wrestling with it. Like, well, should I clip it? Because if you clip it, they'll eat it.
Yeah.
And they also graze it better, honestly. If you clip it, they do better in stockpile.
Get it in the digestible stage. Yeah.
But then I'm like, well, do I just let them not eat it, and then I have more stockpile in the winter that they'll be able to graze a little bit.
And see what you don't have on your beef cattle, you don't have a dipstick on their back measuring what they're doing every day, whereas the guy that milks cows does. He knows how much milk he gets every day.
Right.
So some of that stuff, but she's a dry animal. She's not working that hard. You're just getting this a whole different mentality, a whole different thing. You can actually. With beef cattle, you can do a better job of stockpile feeds and all kinds of things that you couldn't do with a dairy cow.
So what's an example of a dairy farmer that is doing well? Obviously profitability, but farming in an ecological way. What does it look like? What examples do you have that people can use that from your experience?
Yeah, and I think we've done a lot of studies in the past about what's your return on investments and profitability. We actually worked way up in Escanaba, Michigan. There was an extensive study by Michigan State, and farmers in Upper Peninsula, Michigan were more successful in the Lower Michigan. The only difference was the ones in Upper Peninsula were all the ones that I was working with, and so we had all the mineralization taking place and all the things that were going at forages out here. So I'm not saying we can get the most. If you want to go for the most milk, see, I want to go after a balance of minerals and longevity and health of cows and breeding back and a higher percent heifer calves and all the things that I would be after on a farm. And profitability really stems out. I wouldn't want, it takes a lot of, look at the price of feed and look at what it costs to raise up a heifer. The replacement animal, and she only lasts 2 years. I don't know how anybody can afford to keep raising them. I'd rather have that cow. Our oldest cow on our farm, we had one that got to be 17 years old. Now that's a little unusual. Now she raised a lot of breeding stock, she raised a lot of heifer calves on our farm when we was here. She had a high percent heifer calves, which is usually an indication of, she was built right. She was a good cow, indication somewhat of a health that they're going to have bulls or heifers. Because I just got that contact from a friend of mine from Pennsylvania. It's called, they're grazer guys. And he said, normally it's seasonal. So in the spring, he said, normally we got all our heifer calves we want to raise for next year done by the first part of April. It's now in the middle of May and we don't have enough yet. We're getting all bull calves. And I said, you see, I did an extensive study on heifer to bull calf ratios, all the way down. There's a really good farm in Idaho who milks a lot of cows, 1,000 cows. And it's 55% heifer calves. If you go to the slaughter facilities and take a look at embryos going to slaughter facilities, it'll be 60% bull calves. I worked at a farm in Minnesota. They had 80 bull calves born in a row, a large farm. And I said, what in the world's going on? In nature, can you imagine the deer herd out here? In nature, there's a stress going on. There's a drought. There's not much feed. Why would they have more females? They can't feed the ones they have, so they'll have more males. You know, people sometimes laugh at this, but it's real. You can affect this. I said to the guys in Pennsylvania, I said, what did you do 9 months ago? Were you in a drought? I said, you got too much free nitrogen, nitrates, too much, not enough sulfur. We don't get the sulfur we used to get in the atmosphere. I want to make complete proteins. So I'd want to be on a dairy farm that my whole focus was longevity and healthy cows, and they bred on schedule. And I wouldn't want to fight them. I wouldn't want to buy my milk production, but that just would be me.
How would you breed them? Because the ones I think the ones I'm familiar with, it's just a constant cycle where the bulls are always in with the cows, and you're always just...
Yeah, and I think nowadays what's really changed, see, my whole thing was years ago, I never thought we'd get to this mess, because I said, look, we're going to have more bull calves born all the time because the cows are under such stress. And they turn them over so fast, how are we going to have replacements? What happened? Sex semen. So now they pick out their good cows or their heifers. See, a lot of these farms won't breed their cows with sex semen because they're hard to get pregnant with females. Because they're going to have a bull calf more if she's under stress. It's like the pregnancy rates really drop on adult, but heifers, they're not under all that stress, and they can breed, they can pick out, they say that's your new line of genetics, that should be an improvement over the mothers. They'll go, they synchronize the heat, and they'll breed them all the sex semen and get 85% heifer calves. That's their replacements then. So they can, that's why they can take beef bulls into their, that's why you see so many Black Angus Holstein crosses coming to the sale barn, because they can breed all the ones, they only have to breed a segment of their cows replacements to get their heifer replacements they need.
And they get naive cattle buyers like me that think they're just a nice black.
Yep, and it is kind of crazy that what we do in science and research is always solve a problem, but we don't solve the problem, we figure out a way to live with the problem. Sex semen is a way to get heifer calves on a farm because we couldn't do it, we couldn't get enough replacements with the turnover they were having.
Yeah, that's interesting. Process of having a calf. How are you guys how would you handle the process when your milking cow would have a calf? Would you get them right on a bottle and then keep that mama milking, or what's your theories of allowing them some time with the calf to keep it?
I think the problem with that, see, when we'd have groups come from Madison out here in the buses and they'd come to our farm because we were involved with, I made my own cheeses for a while.
Oh.
So anyway, they'd come out here, the thing they hated most is that we took the baby away from mama.
Yeah.
We got 300 cows out there. If I left that calf with those cows, you think it'd be alive tomorrow? Someone would have stomped it to death by now. And I said, besides, I got calves running around sucking cows and the wrong ones, and their milk letdown is out of cycle. I said, and if I leave it even for a few days, the mother starts getting attached. I know this may sound cruel, but when the mother starts getting attached, now I go through a withdrawal with that mama. She'll be bellering, she won't let her milk down, and I got struggles with the cow. So ideally for us, when the calf is born, it leaves. So she doesn't get the chance to, in her mind, her calf died.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how else to do that. Now I can go to farms where they can be raised as nurse cows. That works really well, but that doesn't fit it fits smaller grazer kind of farms. So I would actually, organically we couldn't use milk replacement. I like to raise them on milk, but now we use a lot of milk replacement. You can make anything work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. What do you think? When we talk about like KPIs or key performance indicator, like numbers, the amount of heifer calves that you have, what about the actual calf survival rate?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. We got a guy that's bringing his cattle down. He's an organic farmer. He milked 60 cows. He got his calves there. He said he had one sick calf last year out of 60 cows. One.
Wow, that's impressive.
And he said it was only sick for a couple of days. He had a little bit of scours.
And didn't die.
Didn't die. Didn't have any of them die. Now they're on our farm here because he doesn't need all these replacements and whatever he's got here. So he's got a 3-way cross and he's organic, and you don't probably get the most milk, but they're making a living on 60 cow dairy farm. They've been in the family a long time and passing down through here. So you talk about. So to me is that that's why I say when I take that cow and I'm going to dry her up from her milking period and go into her dry period, I want to have. I'll get them dry as fast as I can, and just quit milking her. When the pressure builds up on the udder, she's going to quit milking, quit producing milk. So then during that 60 days, everybody tries to shorten that now. See, I got to make sure they got the right kind of feeds and the right kind of mineral balance. I want to make sure that we don't do any. I got to watch my potassium levels and I got to watch my protein levels. So grass, good quality grass, hay, a little bit of corn silage. You see, I wanted during the dry cow period. During that period of time, that gut's a fermentation vat. And if I take her off all grain during her dry period, and all of a sudden she's starting to milk, and I put all this hot grain back in her. So if I go during her dry period, she's going to eat less feed than when she's milking. She might eat 50 pounds of dry matter milking and 25 when she's dry. So my percentage, I'd feed a little bit of corn silage or a little bit of grain during her dry period, maybe oats and some other grain, so I don't lose the bugs in that rumen that need grain. So then after she has her calf, there's a transition period, but then we slowly start bringing the grain level up, but the percent in her diet doesn't change radically. I might go from 25% to 40% grain in the diet. I didn't go from 0 to 40%.
Yeah.
And I got to make sure I don't let her get too fat during her dry period. I got to make sure she's got enough things to build up her muscle tone. Her minerals can't be out of balance. So when she does calve, she doesn't flip her rumen. She doesn't have her health issues. And she's got enough immune system, vitamin E, selenium. There's a whole bunch of things that are really essential during that dry period. So she can get off and running and without giving you trouble.
And that probably follows into my next question with how do you improve the survival rate of the moms?
Yeah,
I can't imagine the blow that must be to a dairy if you lose a milking cow and you maybe lose the calf, or I mean, both things are super valuable.
Super valuable, and I think people lose them, and then now, of course, if we get them too fat, that's always a problem because then they have ketosis and all these kind of things. And then I think the thing is to get on. That's why you got to get them off all that hot ration. We got them on a controlled diet so they don't. If you want an animal to gain weight, you don't have them gain weight during their dry period. You have them gain weight while they're still milking that last lactation. I see these little things. So they just maintain themselves during that dry period. They won't have, see, if you overdo protein, you can get a huge calf. Now you get calving problems. If you overdo energy, of course she can't have it. She's too fat, and then she's going to have ketosis and kind of things. And so I think that ideal ration, I think people, we know what it takes to get that cow. So she's, for the most part, going to calve and clean and not give you trouble.
And is there anything to do with like the large, is there something to the theory that a large frame Holstein then produces more milk, but then that causes more calving issues?
I think because we bred sharpness in that cow. See, in other words, she's so dairy, she's so sharp. I always said that she's so narrow and so sharp, she's just a rack of bones. Holstein's the only breed of cattle that'll milk themselves to death. Every other breed will quit milking if you don't feed them properly. Mm-hmm. Holstein just keep milking until they die. You know, that's why everybody wants Holsteins. So they really go at it really hard, but they are really sharp and they are weak. We bred weakness in them to get more milk. We haven't bred, that's why the ones that are, you know, we've got these big, tall, monstrous cows. The guys say, oh, they get a lot more milk, but they eat a lot more. That's why I think there's more talk about getting our frame of our cows back down than when I was a kid. 1,400 pound cow was it. They don't have to weigh 1,800 to 2,000 pounds. Look at the extra feed. It's like your beef cows. You got to have a strong, a mama that weighs 1,200 pounds and puts out a real nice calf that's going to grow bigger than her.
Well, and just the calf ease. I don't want to.
Yeah, that's right.
The idea is not to have your hands on them, really.
That's right. They should have that calf on their own for the most part. There's always going to be issues with things you got to watch. But the idea that some people, I think it's popular in the regenerative world and organic world, where they actually only milk once a day. Yes.
And they limit, I guess, the pressure of milking twice a day, and you're pushing for obviously much more milk production. I think their argument is that they make up for it with reduced labor, and then that one milking of a day gets them pretty far compared to. Have you seen anything on that, or what are your thoughts on?
Well, we did it in the end. We couldn't get help, so we went to once a day milking. We're all forages once a day milking. Milk in the morning, then you still have a life. If you got to milk twice a day or 3 times a day, somebody that's crazy. It's insane. That's why robot milking. But we had a 23,000 pound herd average where we did the minerals and we did the grain, and we fed about 25 pounds of corn solids and 10 pounds of shell corn, a couple pounds of roasted beans and super quality forages. We could have a 23,000 pound herd average. Well, all forages milking once a day were 10,000 pound herd average at best. So you get a lot less milk. But the cows...
Over half less.
Oh yeah. So, but your expenses go way down, but there's also another problem that shows up. Somatic cell count is really, see, if the cow's giving half as much milk, your somatic cell count is going to be higher because it's based on white blood cells and shedding and all these other little things. So we have trouble, a lot of these guys have trouble keeping their cell counts down.
What's the somatic cell count?
Well, it's really measuring, it's supposedly measuring the health of the animal, and white blood cells is what they're measuring in there. So if a cow is given 80 pounds of milk a day and then you drop her down to 40, see, even though she's shedding the same number of white blood cells in her system, it's just going to be higher numbers.
Well, how do you transition to that? How did you guys transition to that? I would almost think you need a new herd.
Well, you do. Yeah. And that's where we when we went from 23,000 pound herd to all grazing herd, first thing we should have done is had an auction and sold off all our good cows. Yeah. They didn't survive the next. You got now, and then the crossbreeding. So we were crossbreeding with Fleckvies and Montbéliards and Norwegian Reds, which I think you got to have a different. If you look at the calves that are over on the pasture on our farm, this guy brings here, they're a 3-way cross: Jersey, Holstein, and Norwegian Reds. And so he gets less milk, less components. Just another whole. Now he feeds some grain. He's not an all grass-fed herd, but his calves are only on pasture. There's no grain fed to the calves.
So it's a way for. I mean, if people are sitting on the edge and they're like, we might just sell our dairy herd. It's a way for them to stay in the dairy business, not waste the
And it's a different mindset, and normally they're organic. And I said, there's always got to have issues with them, but I was out in New York at a grazing conference I was speaking at. It was mostly Mennonite and Amish guys there. And there was the one guy comes, 25 years he's been milking once a day. And he said, I wouldn't be dairying at all. He had been in his 60s already. But he said, I had a good life. I'm seasonal, and I'm once a day. I get a break from it. And he said, I just milk my once a day. And he said, I make much better living here, and I like what I do than I had to go get a job in town.
I feel like I could handle that, but the twice a day thing is the one that I just can't. I can't get behind that. The fact that you tell me I got to be there in the afternoon, no way.
Well, these crazy guys milking 3 times a day. Oh God! Now I think robots.
So what's the schedule with that? Every 8 hours?
Yeah. Well, they might do a 10-hour window in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But oh yeah, if they really strictly going to do it, they got to have a crew coming and milking at night, and oh my gosh, or whenever it might be, you can get more milk out of a cow. But robots. But then you got a $250,000 in each robot, and they milk about 40 or 50 cows successfully. If you can stretch them to 60 cows, but still.
Yeah, I heard a story of the people or of a farm that invested in the robots, and then in order for them to be able to pay for the robots, they needed a certain amount of cows, and the robots couldn't service the amount of cows they needed.
That's right. Then they pushed them too hard. There's a farm down in Illinois that this guy's got 3 boys, and one's really into cattle. He said, well, they farm a lot of acres, but they got one robotic thing, and they milk 60 cows, and they can grow forages. It helps their rotation, and the kid that's really into cows, he can do it all by himself.
Yeah. So, piece of advice to dairy farmers currently, what would be something for them to think differently? Just that they're probably not hearing from, their feed supplier, fertilizer supplier, that you would say, focus on these things.
Yeah, I say that's why I said give me your forages and give me your dry cows. I think they got to focus on getting that cow healthy, and they got to grow super quality forages and understand what it takes to balance that ration. And I'm not opposed to some corn solids. 25, 30 pounds of corn solids a day is not a bad thing for a Holstein to have in their diet. And it works really well because I got to dilute down that high, rich quality forages, and corn won't take up protein. Fat corn solids doesn't take up protein. So I think you got to stay within the principles and say, what kind of a farm do I want to have? What kind of life I want to have? I said the secret to dairying is having 12 kids.
Yeah, that's why they all had them.
My wife's from a family of 14.
Yeah.
This isn't new.
Yeah.
When the last kid graduated high school, guess what went with him? The cows.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Dad wasn't going to milk them anymore.
That's funny. How were you received in the industry when you started talking, or going to dairy farms and talking about mineral balancing?
I think I was received really well on the farms, because the ones that what kind of a farm did I attract?
Yeah.
The ones that wanted to didn't want sick cows, didn't like dealing with them. They wanted to have a life, and they wanted to have a nice, clean herd of cows. They wanted to be healthy, and they wanted to still had to make them money. And then they also wanted to make they weren't into buying all these inputs. They were into more into now. Having said that, we do a lot of fertilizer work on mega farms today that are after super quality forages, but they're only I don't balance their ration. They're still going to feed a lot of corn solids, but what they feed in forages, they want to be good. So,
what was in all the places that you've spoke? I'm sure you spoke to people or been on people's farms that just shook their head and like, nope, not going to work for me. What is the consistent thing with the people that deny or work against? Kind of what you talk about.
I think there's a lot of people see some of the farms that's hard to change because they got a certain level of debt, and they got a certain amount of milk check. They got to have a certain amount of milk check every month to pay the bills. And so if I start on a system that might make them more profit in the end, but I either got to milk more cows to get that milk check if I'm going to get less milk. But so it depends on what position they're in when they start that world, if they can really make some of those changes. I think a lot of them are really receptive today to higher quality forages. That's just kind of you see, even when they cut their hay and things, and I said Harvester was instrumental in changing some of that stuff. So I think it doesn't fit everybody. Is everybody receptive? Years ago, of course, I got a lot of pushback from nutrition companies. Nowadays, a lot of these big farms have their own nutritionist. And some of those guys came from the same school, and they all got the same computers. So, I don't know what they really do. And then, of course, they got a veterinarian on staff, too, then to make sure so they can get through all this stuff. So why we do a lot of business in the Northeast, their dairy nutrition guy is really on our side. He likes the kind of feed that we grow for those cows. It makes his life easier. But boy, nowadays you got to team up with on larger farms. See, I wanted to have the guys that that made the decisions on fertilizer also milk the cows. And that's not, on these big farms, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on animal nutrition that you think is important as far as your background and what would fit into, you know, everything that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important is that you can lay out a really good plan. And I think some of the things that we came up with over the years, tighten your rotation, don't leave your hay in for 3-4 years on hay. So and all the little things to get more uniform feed tests so they're not all over the place. So you have 4-year-old hay stand as a different feed test than a fresh new one because you dumped all that manure on it for 3 years while it was in corn. So there's some of those rules out. And the other thing is that it's just not an exacting science. If we're going to cut your minerals by 50% because you grew better quality forages and feeding at 60% haylage or forage diet, not in corn silage is not really a forage. It's got shell corn with it. So you got to take a. I say if you really truly want to measure what corn silage, you got to take the ear out of it. So you say, oh, I feed a high forage diet, but they're feeding 60 pounds of corn silage. I said, well, I'm sorry, on a dry matter basis, that's half shell corn. So then, so I got to look at the mineral levels. So if we're going to violate that, we don't really know exactly. I can watch what cows do during their dry period. I didn't want to skimp on any of her minerals, but during the milking period, I can really watch that thing. So free choice. We would always put a free choice system out there. I like to put out there a 1-to-1 mineral because phosphorus is really critical. She has to have her phosphorus. Years ago, we balanced rations for a lot more phosphorus than they do today. But coming from a high quality forage, that phosphorus is much more usable we're getting today. And so my free choice thing, I'd have a 1-to-1 mineral. So if she wanted more phosphorus, she'd hit that mineral. I wanted to have a buffer out there that so I could have a bentonite or we used the Jerry Benetti's Dynamin out there as a free choice buffer kind of a source out here. And so we'd have and possibly a calcium source out here. So she could go, if she's all of a sudden hit that mineral really hard, then we'd say, wait a minute, something's going on here, we better watch it. Now, guys got cafeteria style minerals, and some people, those goat farmers swear by them. Oh my gosh, they said it really changed their goat farming by having, but now dairy cows, a lot of people couldn't afford it. We did that for a while when we were only foragers. I had a cafeteria style mineral out here. And yeah, it was weird how some things they'd hit different than different times of the year. But you can't get pure minerals. You get things mixed with them. So I'm not so sure it fit our farm that well because it was really expensive to do.
Yeah, we use it on my home farm.
Cafeteria style?
Yeah, it's. I think it makes a big difference, but it is expensive.
Yeah.
You know, it's much more expensive.
And some of the things are consuming.
The ones that I've noticed is they keep better condition during the tough summer months. They have better fly control, and then the things that become issues in the winter, I think they keep their condition better. But then like the ringworm and lice, they seem to be able to battle it off better when they're truly on that free choice.
And then see, that was how I met Joel Soliton. He said you're gonna have him speak at your event here next year. Is that we brought in my brother-in-law was from Iceland. And he was my business manager. He married my sister. They met in Saudi Arabia. But anyway, Kelp from Iceland. Mm-hmm. So his uncle managed the Kelp facility in Iceland. So we got hooked up with Wolf and Associates, and we imported. We were the largest distributor of Icelandic kelp in North America for many, 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 many years. So we did all this dairy work. So we started feeding kelp to cows. So Joel Solid, I did a training for farmers every year. I do a 2-day event and bring in farmers and our consultants to learn. And I wanted someone to talk about kelp. So Bill Wallace said, I can't make it, but I got this farmer that's using kelp. I'll send him. It was Joel Soliton. First time he ever did a public speaking event.
Really? Yep. What year was that?
Back in the 80s.
That's funny.
And he had a 3-point suit on. And I remember distinctly he got up there and said, now if you guys got a farm at night, there's something wrong. Take a hammer and go out and smash the light bulbs out of your tractor. And one farmer says, I like farming at night. Nobody bothers me when I farm at night. You know, no phone calls, no nothing. Well, anyway, Joel went out there and he said, you feed kelp to your cows and you won't have pink eye. So this was in February. So I started, we had beef cattle town. We started feeding kelp. Oh my gosh, we had pink eye everywhere that summer. I said, well, that's a dumb idea. Never had it. See, you got to feed it for 6 months ahead of time or a year ahead of time. We never ever had pink eye. Our neighbor had blind cows across the other side of the fence from ours. So it's such bad pink eye in their cattle they couldn't. And I was right across the fence and we never had it. as long as we fed our kelp. So I did Redmond salt or good natural sea salt with kelp. We mixed them half and half, and so otherwise sometimes you put kelp out there free choice on a herd. A lot of times if they're really stressed, they'll eat you out of house and home. But they'll eventually back off. They'll eventually come down if you can live through the high overconsumption of it. So mixing it with salt kept the consumption in line, and we mixed salt and kelp together. But that was basically about pink eye and cattle health. And now, of course, they put garlic into the Redmond salt and things to get down on flies. I didn't see it cut down on the flies. I saw it cut down on the less flies landed.
Yeah.
They were still out there, but they weren't in their eyes.
Right. Or overwhelming them.
Yeah, it weren't overwhelming them.
Yeah. So what were some of the things that you did being an organic place for fly control?
Well, we did everything from putting out fly baits and everything else, but we just find
it doesn't seem to work.
When there's manure, we went around, we bought it, coming up every week a batch of larvae would come in there, but I don't know, we weren't good enough at managing it, I guess so.
I just think it's a tough
world. The flies are going to be the flies, and and that was always a problem. We didn't have it, and we did actually. I did some things that we would try to put out there for sprays, and we went through that zapper thing they walk through and scraped them off and cut them numbers down a little bit. See, otherwise, when they're on their stomach, out these little biting gnats or flies. Oh my God, it's hard to milk them. They're constantly kicking those little flies, and we would use different kinds of things. Oils and stuff. We'd try to spray on there, but nothing really was that great.
That's kind of what I found. Honestly, the free choice mineral is the only thing, and the only reason I noticed it last year is because as we get moving and we're moving daily, another thing with it is it's kind of a pain to move. Whereas before I didn't need any type of equipment to move the cattle, and then this thing, you can't really pull it by hand. So we had slacked on it for like a month, and the flies started getting bad. And the second I just committed to it and kept them moving with it, the flies got better. So
yeah.
But it's difficult. But I look at it like at least in our situation, we usually just have like a month, where it's really bad, and then it goes away. So is it really worth spray all that stuff on
I think the healthier the cows, the healthier the forages are too. I've been on farms where some of those cows are raising, and the flies are just, you can pick out the flies will be on this animal, not this animal.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. You select for it,
Yeah, and I think the health of the animals, some of those animals, that they're stressed, and some of these dairy cows are really thin on all fours. I know why the flies. I said the flies already think she's dead.
All right, well, that's a good episode. We kind of talked about animal nutrition and how you got into dairy nutrition. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else I'd want to mention. I always get back to that question, what kind of farm do you want to be? To me, the fun in farming is not being a slave to agribusiness, not fighting all the problems. Yeah. So I'd want to try to minimize my problems as much as one possibly can. You got that many animals, there's always going to be trouble. My daughter raised pigs for a while, and oh gosh, she used to get really upset when one would die or something, and she'd be crying. I said, I met a guy in Iowa, and he was a hog guy, and he said, look, if you're going to have livestock, you're going to have dead stock. Just get used to it.
Yeah, that's what I was told too the first time I had something die.
Yeah, you can't get emotional about these things, and you can't have 100 cows and not have some die. You can't have 100 people and not have some die.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we actually had I'm contract grazing a farm, and they dropped off 30 steers, and they came off the trailer fine, and one, for whatever reason, the next morning was down, hanging out by the water, and I'd moved the cattle into the next paddock, and that one sat under a tree, and he was kind of foaming out of his mouth. Wow. I thought it was pneumonia because he was kind of labored breathing, and I called the owner. I was like, you might want to get something up here. You want to come check him out, or I don't know what happened. He's dead 2 hours later.
Well, got him.
Whatever got him.
Toxins, it almost sounds like.
I don't know if it was just because he hit the grass too fast there, or I don't know.
It could have been, pneumonia is a big issue. If he's foaming out of the mouth, his lungs could have been a problem.
It looked like, because I was on a different farm 2 weeks prior, and they pointed out a couple. I'd asked them why these like two were labored, and they said it was pneumonia. Yeah. Well, in my mind too, I was like, well, it probably isn't like a dire thing that's going to happen. That's the only thing in my head. It's like, how did it happen so quick? Because usually they can live with that.
The stress of moving, they can live it well. So years ago, when cattle were really cheap, now they're the opposite. You could go to a sale barn, and good cattle were cheap. So I bought 7 sick calves, just doing some trials with it. And I got home, I had 8 in the trailer, so they gave me an extra one for free.
Oh, that's nice.
Trying to get rid of the damn thing, but nobody would bid on it. And so I got home and I mixed up humates. I was doing a trial on humates and vitamin E, and so I used to make a product called Conceive to help get cows pregnant for these guys who had show cattle and fancy things. They wanted to flush these animals. We did a lot of it. There's products out here, vitamin E, selenium, all kinds of things. We did kelp to get better embryos from flushing cattle out here. So I put humates and stuff. The grain was black. And in the beginning, they hardly ever ate it. And within 3 weeks, they went from looking really sick to looking really good. Maybe a month, maybe it was longer. But anyway, my cousin's a veterinarian, so he came out there and he said, yeah, I said, but I saw them when they came. He said, some of those guys got pneumonia. He said, wait till you run them. I said, all right, let's run them. They didn't cough. Somehow or another, he didn't think we could cure the pneumonia, but it sure did. They weren't coughing all the time anyway.
So would you pen them up and feed them hay and then feed them these
I fend them up. I had them I had them outside an exercise lot, and I had 8 head. And I gave them a grain mix with all super high levels of nutrition, high levels of vitamins and minerals and all kinds of things I do. And then the humates in there. And the kelp was high in there. So they were fussy at eating it in the beginning. After a while, boy, they just licked the manger clean. It really changed them. It really changed them.
That's about the only way I can afford to buy cattle these days. Buy the sick ones.
My daughter.
What would you, last question, how would you transition a beef animal that's getting a corn silage ration or some grain in their diet? I would assume you probably wouldn't recommend just cutting them straight off the grain going to grass, or?
I would, yeah, because the grass is going to be, now if the grass is more mature and things, I might be able to get away with it. She's going to take a hit out here. She's got to change her bugs in her system. I always like to transition with just some good old medium kind of grass. Hey, but if you certainly don't want to turn them in young succulent pasture coming off a grain diet. But if it's mature, headed out kind of pasture, she can kind of watch herself. She's not going to kill herself.
Yeah.
If she has no choice.
Would you transition them with some grain for like a week or two? Or just...
I don't know if I need to, because I'm not. If I was a dairy animal, I have to go through a change down here. But I'm not, she's gonna, like I said, you don't have a.
This is always my concern when I'm buying sales barn animals. I'm assuming they've been fed that hay or silage, some sort of ration, and I've never been burned by it by getting them straight onto hay and grass. But
no, I think you can do that just fine as long as it's not rich, super rich pastures. That's where you're gonna get in trouble.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Another great conversation. We're going to go walk around outside for a little bit.
So I leave this microphone.